So this is part two of the campaign finance lecture. We're going to start where we left off, and the next massive piece of legislation that Congress attempted to rein in the amount of spending on campaigns and those kinds of things was the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002. And this did a number of things. Number one, the FEC placed limits on contributions by individuals and groups to candidates, party committees, and PACs. And you can look up some of these limits in the textbook on page 553, or here is a link that you can go to, and it has a nice little chart that kind of gives you an idea of exactly how much money can be donated to those different kinds of groups or entities. It also banned soft money donations to national political parties. Remember that soft money is any money or campaign contributions to political parties for party building activities, get out to vote campaigns, registrations, those kinds of things. And at that time, they were unlimited and they did not need to be disclosed. So this sought to ban that kind of donation, which would give political parties a lot more money to deal with. It also limited cash donations to state political parties up to $10,000. So they set a limit there, and it restricted these donations to voter registration and get out the vote drives, once again to build parties up. It restricted the money for those kinds of uses. It limited hard money donations to $2,000, and it actually indexed that number for future increases to inflation. So as inflation went up, that number would adjust as well. But hard money, remember what that is. It's any campaign contribution to candidates that are limited and disclosed, meaning the donors have to be disclosed to the public and made public, so that way people know where that money is coming from. And that's considered hard money. So if there are limitations, it's hard money. Soft money, there aren't limitations to that. And then finally, unions and corporations at that time were banned from giving soft money to parties. So unions, corporations have a lot more money. They tried to ban that from an actual organization such as a union or a corporation to give soft money, unlimited amounts of money to parties to build parties up and advocate for certain things. So they tried to ban that as well. And they did that through that legislation. Now, here comes Citizens United, one of the more controversial rulings from the Supreme Court as it relates to campaign finance. So in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations, unions, and associations are considered persons under the First Amendment. And that's not the first time they had identified corporations or unions as persons, even though clearly they're made up of many persons, but they do that for lawsuit issues and different kinds of things. So that, I think, in the legal world wasn't such a huge surprise, but in this case it was a bit baffling. But they can make unlimited independent, and the key here is independent expenditures from their treasury supporting and attacking candidates. So the key is independent. They can't be associated with a particular candidate or party in that same way, but they could then use unlimited funds to donate to those particular causes. And I guess I should clarify, an independent expenditure as a definition is an expenditure for a communication, whether that's a radio ad, TV ad, or whatever that might be, that expressly is advocating the election or defeat of a clearly identified candidate, that is not made in cooperation with, so it's not tied in any sort of way, in consultation or in concert with, or at the request or suggestion of a candidate or a candidate's authorized committee or their agents or a political party or its agents. Lots of legalese trying to define specifically that in no way can these soft monies or these independent expenditures can be coordinated with the candidate or the campaign in any sort of way. which then, if you're not going to do that, who's going to account for and control this money, which has led to the formation of super PACs, which can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money advocating for or against specific candidates or issues. They are prohibited from direct donations to candidates. So this became the vehicle to take this unlimited, well, not unlimited, but seemingly unlimited amounts of money that these corporations and unions had and pushing those into the political fray. What you had then is the Citizens United decision, which basically created the need for super PACs. And if you combine it with the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, versus Wisconsin Right to Life, which was basically a super PAC, what you got from that is the decision from that court case basically said it allows group to not only legally advocate for or against political candidates without restrictions on the amount of money they can raise from individuals or corporations, but these independent groups, which are organized under the under the tax code as a 501c entity, which gave them certain tax exemptions and things like that, can run these issue-oriented political ads without disclosing their donors. So now mega donors, unbelievably wealthy people who have certain issues or agendas could donate to these super PACs, and no one would ever have to know who's making those donations to that money. Give you an example of that is Crossroads. It's a nonprofit, or set up as a nonprofit, as a 501c4 organization, and it's not required by the IRS to disclose its donors. And as such, organizations are intended to promote social welfare. So they can't be specifically political, but if they're promoting social welfare, or they can make the case that they're promoting social welfare in one way or another, then their political campaigning can fly through the legal system. So according to the New York Times, the rule of thumb, and here I guess is kind of the legal definition, is that more than 50% of a 501c4's activities cannot be political. Okay, so they are restricted to some degree. However, once again, if they can fall under that category of intervening in political campaigns, as long as its primary purpose is the promotion of social welfare, then they're okay. And so there's always ways to get around some of these restrictions that they're trying to put up for campaign finance reform and getting money, big money, out of the election system. So there's always been ways around it. I'm going to say this is the end of part 2, but you know what? We're just going to go on and do part 3 real quick here. So if you want to pause, you can. If not, we'll just move right on. So let's look at the analysis of this overall. What has this really done, these 2 major acts, and people finding ways around this? So what you get is most campaigns aren't taking the subsidies from the government, and as a result, it really increases the incumbency advantage, because now money plays a bigger and bigger role in these different campaigns. Without limits on spending in congressional races, you end up with some massive spending on congressional races and further incumbency advantage. Members of Congress end up spending great amount of their time fundraising projects. So there have been some cases where members of Congress are spending 50% of their time fundraising and trying to pull that money in, as opposed to actually working and looking at legislation and voting on the floor and doing those kinds of things. So people get pretty upset about that. You get late starters, people who want to come into the race late. They're pretty much discouraged because they haven't built up their war chests, and so that makes it really tough on them. You have no limitations on independent expenditures, meaning money not donated to a party or candidate, but rather spent on behalf of a candidate. And so super PACs come in, they can't really coordinate. They're not spending it directly on that party or candidate, but they can create their own ads and do those kinds of things. You have the rise of 527 issue advocacy ads. So what this does, With the lack of limits on independent expenditures and the previous lack of limits on soft money, it's really given rise to these 527 issue advocacy ads. So take a particular issue, and we're going to create some kind of a media campaign around that. And spending on these is also unlimited as long as the ads do not endorse a candidate per se. Clearly, we'll know which candidate stands on or how they stand on those issues. They must be in some way voter mobilization ads, and you can imagine if you say, hey, get out, support this issue, go and vote, and we know who you're supposed to vote for even though we can't say it, we're clearly getting around some of those rules. Minor presidential candidates can't receive these subsidies, right, unless the party earned at least 5% of the popular vote in the previous election. Makes it very difficult for them because most of the time they never even come close to 5% of the votes needed, and so as a result they can't get matching funds, and so it's limited their ability to have any kind of an impact in any kind of an election. You have the rise of candidate-centered campaigns, more and more money coming in, looking at issue-oriented politics as a way to get around some of this hard money stuff. And so parties themselves that have a variety of platforms, they're weakened. The funds go directly to the candidates themselves rather than the parties. And so you start to see split ticket voting and those kinds of things based more around the issues, and the issues get promoted more than anything else. You've seen the growth of PACs and candidates becoming dependent on some of those PACs because they get money from that. That is becoming less and less as super PACs have moved into the fray, but we can kind of incorporate PACs and super PACs together based on the dependence on these and the money that they raise. The candidate cannot be required to abide by spending limits. If they choose not to grab the subsidy and they choose to go it themselves, what we've seen is they can certainly create huge, large war chests that are far greater than the limits, and so it's not to their advantage to take the subsidies. And then we know that the cost of campaigning has risen as a result of all this money going in, which makes it more prohibitive for third-party candidates as well. But more and more time is spent on raising money because we know money seems to really, really work. And then a large majority of PAC money goes to incumbents, once again increasing the incumbency advantage and entrenching those already in the system. So you can see lots of things to kind of curb campaign finance, and they always find a way around it. Into part 3, we're all done.